So here's something I want you to think about. Many times when a user performs some kind of action in your application, you want to give them some kind of notification to let them know, for example, hey, your account has now been successfully deactivated. So maybe that would be useful for our little blog here. Blog article, add a little description here, publish it. And notice that, yes, we got redirected here, and honestly, in this case, it's perfectly evident that we were successful, but as you can imagine, for lots of other things, you really do need some kind of notification. Even something as simple as when you click on the logout button, you see a little confirmation message that says you have now been logged out. Let's figure out how to handle that in this lesson. And I'll show you two ways. First, we will do the manual route, and then next, I'll show you a small little package you can pull in to make it laughably simple. Okay. Our first step is to go to Articles Controller. Now, when a user creates a new article, as we know, the store method gets called, where we new up an article and save it. And actually, a quick little aside. Here, we are newing up an article and passing that to the save method. But also, if you'd prefer, you could use the create method. So much like we did this, where we pass in an array of attributes, the same would be true here. So if you'd prefer, you could say, get the authenticated user's articles and create a new one using the request from the form. So if we removed that, this would still work in exactly the same way. All right, but anyways, we've created a new article. We're going to redirect back to the articles list, but I also want to display what we would call a flash message, a message that you flash to the screen for one page request. And then if they reload the page, they won't see it anymore. We call this a flash message. So here's how we can do it in Laravel. Well, we have a session facade. So we could say session, and I want to flash a message. We give it some kind of identifier, flash message, and then the body. How about your article has been created? Okay, so this handles the session-specific aspect. However, when we redirect, we're still not going to see that message. We still have to display it somewhere in our view. So let's do this. Let's go to our master page. If this applies to every single view, a master page is a good place to put that. And why don't we place it right here at the top of our container? And later, we can extract a partial. But for now, let's just put it right here. Why don't we say, if the session has that key, so if session has a flash message, well, in that case, we want to display it. So why don't we use a div that has a class of alert and alert success. These are Twitter Bootstrap specific classes. That'll just make it a little easier for us. And then within here, we will echo out the message. Session get flash message. Okay, so already we've learned a few methods of the API. First, we have session flash. Think of that as a one-time flash. You also have things like session put. Put this into the session. The difference between that and flash, once again, is flash is temporary for just the one request. So we have those two, and then we can see we also have things like session has. Do we have this key in the session? And if we do, then get the value associated with that key. Let's see what this looks like in the browser. So once again, I'm going to create a new article. Just write test, test, and if we add it, sure enough, you can see it right there. Now, here's what I meant about it being a one-time thing. If we reload this page, well, we only flashed it, so we no longer see it, which means it's perfect for these little notification messages. Now, though, you'll probably find that for most production apps, you need a little more flexibility. For example, when we redirected back to this page with the flash message, well, it just sort of displayed indefinitely. Maybe you want to display the message for 4 seconds, and then you want it to slide up, right? You want it to disappear. But then in other situations, for really important messages, you want that to display indefinitely. And then the user has to click a little X button to acknowledge that, yes, they've read it, but they want to remove it. So it seems like, in reality, we need a little more flexibility here. Let's see how we might do that. Well, to begin, if we go back to our view, why don't we add a little X at the top? And I'll just paste this in. This actually comes directly from the Twitter Bootstrap website. It's just the code you add to put a little X button. So let me show you what that looks like. Articles/create, test2, publish it, and now we get the message, and you'll see there's a little X there. But if I click on it, nothing happens because Twitter Bootstrap uses a little JavaScript for that. So why don't we add that? Why don't we place that down at the bottom right before the closing body? And for a real project, you probably have this stored locally, but I'll just paste this in. We're getting the latest version of jQuery, not even a cached version. We're just referencing it directly. And then we have the entire JavaScript for Twitter Bootstrap that is stored on a CDN. So just keep in mind, we're doing this for convenience. In reality, if you were using Twitter Bootstrap, you could download a custom JavaScript file that only includes the components that your application would actually use. But this is just an example, and it'll do just fine. So now, let's try it again. We're going to create a third test article, test3, and if we add it now, we have the X button, and if we click it, it gets removed. Easy enough. But like I said, in some situations you want that, and in other situations you don't want to make the user click. You want a quick message that disappears after 2 or 3 seconds. So maybe you could only display the button if some other value in the session is set. For example, if the session has flash message important, well, in that case, we want to keep it on the screen until the user removes it. So display the button only on that condition. Next, if we want some kind of hook for our JavaScript, maybe we could do that again. We could say if we have flash message important, well, in that case, let's add a class here. Alert important. Otherwise, we don't have to display anything. Oh, and also on that note, right here, well, we have helper functions as well. There is a session function in Laravel 5. And this actually can be pretty flexible. If we take a look at it, here it is. Well, if we just call session and we don't pass anything, that'll return to us what's stored within the IOC container. So you could still do things like session get or session flash, all of this stuff. Very similar to using redirect or view. But if we pass an array to it, then Laravel will assume that we are putting something to the session. And then finally, if we just pass some kind of string, it assumes that we're doing the equivalent of session get. So that means if I switch back, you could change this like so and get the exact same effect. Also, that means back within articles controller, rather than having to add use session at the top of your file or referencing it globally like we did here, you could just say session flash, like so. All right, but let's return to our view. So now, if we flash to the session a key of flash message, on the very next request, we will display it. But also, if something called flash message important exists as well, then we want to also display a close button. Finally, we could write a little bit of JavaScript to hide it. And I'll just use some jQuery right within here. So we basically want to say, give me the div that has a class of alert. So basically, give me a collection of all elements on the page that match this CSS, but filter it down because I'm not interested in any element that has a class of alert important. That should not apply. Then we just want to wait or delay for about 3 seconds and then slide it up. All right, why don't we review this in the browser? So once again, we create a fourth blog post, we add it, and notice it displays for a few seconds, and then it slides up. Cool, right? But now we're going to flash an additional key to the session. Back to our editor, we open up Articles Controller. And now, well, we can actually do this in a couple ways. One would be to duplicate that. So flash message important would be equal to true in this case. Let's see if that works. This will be our 5th attempt. So we add the article. And now you'll see it does not hide, but we do have an X button. So you can manually deactivate that once you've read it. Cool. But like I said, there's a couple ways to do this. So yes, we could do that, but we could also append a with method here. So when we redirect and call with, well, it's assumed that we are flashing something. So we could do this. Flash message equals, and then once again, we could do flash message important here. So this approach would be equivalent. Now, whenever we create a new article, we redirect back to the articles list page, and then we also flash a few keys to the session in the process, a message and an indicator of whether it's important and should remain, or not important and can fade out. So if we go back to app.blade.php, well, this is a perfect example of something that could be extracted to a partial. So let's open up our sidebar, go into Resources, Views, and why don't we add a partials directory here, and we'll call it Flash. And I'll paste that in. Now if I switch back, I can say include partials.flash, and we'll get the exact same end result. So cool, now you know how to do it. But that still doesn't change the fact that it's still a little cumbersome. Really, what I'd rather do for my actual project is something like this. Maybe I could call a Flash function like this, and then I could remove all of this and redirect, and that would still do the exact same thing. And then if I did want it to be important, maybe I could flash the message and then tack on a method like important. That would be preferable in my mind. And really, it's very easy to implement something like that. I've already gone ahead and done it, so if you want, you can pull in a small package that gives you this sort of API. Let me show you how. Back to the terminal, I'm going to Composer, Require, Laracasts, Flash. And now, while that's being pulled in, we can go to our config app.php file, and we should add the service provider. So we can do that right down here. Laracasts, Flash, Flash service provider. And a quick note on this, if you're ever wondering, well, how was I supposed to know that? Well, for any package you pull in, you view the documentation, many times right there on GitHub, and they'll tell you exactly what to do. Step 1, Composer Require. Step 2, add this service provider. And step 3, add an alias. So on that note, if you do want a custom facade, well, you could add it down here, but it's not required. So you could do something like this, and we will reference Laracasts, Flash, Flash. All right, so that should do it. Back to Articles controller. Now, yes, we have a helper function you can use, or if you prefer the facade approach, then you could say flash an information message, or an error message, or a success message. And then behind the scenes, it just handles the process of setting these keys for you. Let me show you what that looks like. There is a Flash notifier class, and notice, for example, if we were to run flash success, then we create a new Flash message, and it only flashes a few keys to the session, very much like we did earlier. This just gives you a nicer API or a nicer wrapper around that, so you don't have to repeat yourself over and over. And also what's cool is you have a couple of views that you can pull in and modify however you need to. So let me show you how that works. Let's go back to app.blade.php, and we're not going to reference our custom partial. We will reference one from the view, flash message. And you'll see this is what we get from the package. So if we switch back, I can include a view from a package by referencing the package name, which is flash, : and then the name of the view I want. In this case, it's called message. So let's see what this looks like. Just to make sure we're all on the same page, we create an article, we flash a message, like so, and then we redirect back to the articles list. Okay, let's try it out. We create a new article. I think we're at the 7 at this point. Add it. And once again, we get the exact same thing. Now, in that case, we had an information message, but maybe you want something that is a success message. Then you could say flash success and pass it through. And you'll see mostly the difference is we add a different class name, and then Twitter Bootstrap recognizes it. But if you're not using that, then you can hook into that with your CSS and style it however you want to. So this time, I think it should be green. Yeah, and it is. Now, we've seen flash messages that should remain or hide, but maybe you also want a sort of overlay message. So for example, when you sign up at Laracasts, well, I display a little modal that says, hey, welcome to Laracasts, thanks so much for signing up. That's a different little style, and the package offers that as well. Let me show you. This time, rather than a success message, we will have an overlay message. And you'll see, well, if we just go straight to it and go to overlay, that we give it a message and then also a heading. So we could say, how about this? Your article has been successfully created. And we'll say, good job. Really not a good case for an overlay, but you get the idea. So if you want to use that, the only thing you'd have to do is activate it. So I will comment this out, and then we will fetch the modal, If we take a look at it real quick, you'll see that we have an ID of Flash overlay modal. So you could find that and then simply call a modal method on it. Once again, we're just using a Twitter Bootstrap plugin here. So we reference the script and then we activate the plugin, so to speak. All right, so why don't we try this out in the browser? Final time, I think. So we'll say final, add the article, but this time we get an overlay that you can review and close when you're done. So really, that's all there is to it. You can pull in this package, or if you don't want to bother, don't forget you can still say session. Session, flash a message, and then all you have to do is from your view, listen for whether a key of that name exists, and if it does, echo out the value associated with it. You signed up, something like that. So as an example, on Laracast, I used this exact package. When you sign up, for example, well, I have a little message that says, Flash, you are now logged in. It's clean, it's quick, it's simple, and it's a lot easier than always having to tack on with Flash message equals you are now logged in. These small little wins where you make your code just a little bit cleaner and a little bit shorter really do have a big effect at the end of the day. All right, so now you've mastered the art of Flash messaging.